Today we're going to be looking at the Amiga 2000.
We got 20-minute videos on old technology, computers, laser discs, and some CDs. We got two little dogs licking their balls on the screen, and now it's time for the show.
Alright, so here it is. This is my Amiga 2000. I actually own a lot of Amigas, almost every model. There's a couple I don't have, but really into Amiga. My dad had an Amiga when I was a kid. I had an Amiga 500, so I kind of grew up on the Amiga. I had an Amiga before I had an IBM PC compatible. So again, I have a big attachment to the Amiga, but the model I always kind of wanted and never had was the Amiga 2000, which we have right here. Now this is a great example of Amiga 2000. Technically I guess it would be an Amiga 2000 HD, because it does have a hard drive that's been installed in it, but yeah, I actually traded this for an Amiga 1000. I had two Amiga 1000s, and I know a guy locally that had this Amiga 2000, but he didn't have a 1000, so we did a trade. So now I still have an Amiga 1000, and now I have an Amiga 2000 in really good condition, which I've wanted for quite some time. So why did I kind of want an Amiga 2000? Because I do kind of like desktops. I know the whole keyboard form factor of something like a Commodore 64 or the Amiga 500 or even the Amiga 600 is cool. It's real compact. You have the whole machine into this keyboard, but just I really like the desktop form factor, and I like the expandability it gives. So my main draw to the Amiga 2000 was kind of the fact that it's basically an Amiga 500 with more expandability. And since a huge amount of the Amiga games are kind of geared towards running on an Amiga 500, since it was kind of what most people had, that's usually what game developers kind of geared their games to working on. All those games that should work on an Amiga 500 should work just the same on an Amiga 2000, except I have more room for expandability and adding cards and accelerators and things like that. It just seems it's a little easier to work on than a 500, so in my mind it was just like a better, more expandable Amiga 500. So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to do the standard thing. We're going to take a look at it. I'm going to open it up. We're going to take a look inside. And I'm going to do some really simple mods to it, I guess. Now, we're probably going to be seeing this machine in a video in the future. This is kind of in my permanent setup. I have a lot of things planned for it. I'm going to upgrade the hard drive. I'd like to install a SCSI CD-ROM drive. I would like to install an accelerator that I could toggle on and off for compatibility, but right now we're just going to do two very minor modifications to this machine. The first one is this guy here, and this is just a ROM switcher. It's a dual 1.3 and 3.1 ROM. So 1.3 just for compatibility, that's the older version, and we've got 3.1 just for later stuff. I think certain devices require that, so that just helps us out a little bit. And the other thing, you can't see it because it's in this bubble wrap, but I have a switcher for which floppy drive is the primary drive. I believe it's DF0 and DF1. Now I am using a floppy drive emulator, but it is external. I cannot stand the look of floppy drive emulators when they're installed like a floppy drive. So like if it's installed right here, it is, in my opinion, hideous. I know people love them. I am not debating that. I'm not debating their usability, but sticking a floppy emulator drive into a classic computer is just, oh, it's like a sin. It's so gross looking to me that, but external, it doesn't really bother me. So right now the setup I have is I have the original floppy drive installed here, but it is not connected. And the cable that would generally connect to this, I have coming out of the back and going into my external floppy drive emulator, which we'll take a look at. But the thing is, the Amiga 2000 does have an external floppy connector on the back, but unfortunately you can't switch it. You cannot make it the primary, like sort of the A drive. And the problem is that a lot of these games boot their booter game, so they'll boot straight from the disk, and it needs to be DF0 for that to work. And that little switch there should allow me to toggle between DF0 being this drive and the external port. So that way I can have the this guy hooked up and working, and then I can have my external drive hooked up and working, and I can switch back and forth which one is seen as sort of the A drive. Alright, so I'm going to take this thing down and we're going to take a look at it, and then we're going to open it up. I just have this Amiga 4000 keyboard, but it works just fine, and it attaches via a little adapter. It's kind of like an AT to PS2 sort of adapter there. I have a keyboard. I don't think this is the usual Amiga keyboard. The usual is kind of like that tank, or mouse. The usual Amiga mouse is kind of like that tank one with two big buttons, but this one works just fine. Here it is, obviously a ball mouse. I believe there are ways to get laser mice. Maybe I'll do that in the future. And then, of course, this is a very gaming-centric PC. So in the other port I have a joystick connected, and I have one of those Wilco Commanders. Wilco command control. I really like these joysticks. You have a button here and a button here. You have a little switch that you can switch between which is your button in use, that one or the one on the base. So here's the monitor I'm currently using. It's a Commodore 2002 monitor. It's a bit yellowed, but it's just what I currently have. I've always really liked the Commodore monitors. Pretty good quality. Have usually a lot of options in the back for RGB or composite or even S-video, things like that. Now I do have a 1084S, I believe. That's with the stereo speakers in it. But my friend actually has that monitor right now, and he's working on it because it's having some issues with sound. This monitor just has the mono speaker, not one on each side. There's a little headphone jack, and down at the bottom, this has trouble opening. Horizontal and vertical, hold, color, tint, brightness. Can't think of what that is right now. Volume, and then video mode, RGB. I believe SEP is the S-video, and then composite. And we may have taken a look at this monitor before. I think I was using this same monitor with my Amiga 1000. Here's the back of it, standard power connector. Here's our chroma, video, and audio. So you would have a special cable, and you'd connect both of these for the S-video. It's S-video, it's just a different way of connecting it. If you just put it in here, that would be composite. Here's the audio, and I have a cable on there, and then I have it connecting to this, and it hooks into the two jacks in the back. The Commodore 2000 outputs stereo, but since this is a mono monitor, it just kind of turns it into mono. Here is our RGB input right here, vertical height, and here's where you can switch it between RGB modes. Digital, analog, and negative and positive. Not really sure about all that. April of 1987. Alright, so there's our quick look at this monitor. May have looked at it already, like I said, in the Amiga 1000 video. Can't remember off the top of my head. Now here is the external floppy emulator I'm using. Little USB stick on there. I forget how many gigs that is, maybe 4. It has a little LCD screen. This is really nice. It has a little LCD screen to tell you what games. You go left and right to select. It even emulates the drive sound, not well, but at least it makes a noise like when it's seeking, like if it was a disc that was seeking. Again, doesn't really sound anything like a floppy drive seeking, but it's something. And like I said, I just have this hooked up through a little hole. I took, actually it's right here. I took this off, and then I'm just running the cables out through the back, so I'm not disturbing the look of the machine itself, but I've still got the this floppy emulator here, which is really handy on these machines. Now the plan is to maybe drill 2 holes in this and put the switches through it, and then I could switch back and forth. I have a little adapter for, this is the external floppy disk interface here that will interface, it will connect onto this and then interface with this, and the plan is to use that and then use the little switch from the mod to switch back and forth, and hopefully it will work. Right, so here we have the Amiga 2000 itself, and the front is actually kind of plain. You might even say it's boring. We just have a power LED here, hard drive activity light here, got our little Commodore Amiga 2000 badge. Usually from the factory, the ones that said H that had a hard drive in them were the Amiga 2000 HDs. They actually had a separate faceplate. Looked the same, but just the label here was different, and I've seen little variations on that label. Two 3.5-inch drive bays. Right now I just have this one standard Amiga floppy drive installed, and then we have a 5.25-inch bay here. Usually you would put a CD drive in there. That's going to be a planned upgrade in the future. I'm probably not going to put a separate second floppy disk here or anything here. Now I have to tilt it up a little for you to see. There's the connector for your keyboard, and we have two, I think those are DB9 connectors for things like joysticks and mice. So let's flip this thing around and take a look at the back of it. Okay, so here is the back of the machine. Power supply right here. We have a small little power switch on and off. No switch on the side or the front. You've got to switch this right here. Here's your video connector for the RGB video. Parallel port right here. A little tag says A2000 NTSC. Here is the external disk drive connector right here for attaching external disk drives. Hopefully I'll have it set up, like I said, with that little modification thing that it will let me select this as the primary floppy drive so I can boot from an external drive. Here is two audio outs, RCA jacks for audio out and composite video out. Now, something very interesting about this machine that I discovered actually during the course of this video is the stereo audio works as expected, but the composite out only works as monochrome. I was pretty surprised, especially considering the A1000 outputs color composite, but for whatever reason, this only outputs monochrome, so black and white video through composite, no color. Yeah, so apparently all the Amiga 2000s are like that, where they only output the black and white. That's just how the board is. I'm not sure why they just didn't have it output color, maybe for cost, and it was probably assumed that if you had one of these machines, you were almost certainly going to be using the RGB out. So since this was kind of oriented for work, I guess maybe the thought was that you could hook this up to like a monochrome monitor for, you know, text and work, since there was a lot of monochrome monitors still kicking around in the days, like green phosphor screens and stuff like that when this came out. So maybe that's why it's just monochrome or black and white out, but it's kind of annoying. It was a little bit annoying for me, as you'll see later in this video, because I wanted to do some video capture lazily, and I was going to use the composite out since I don't have an adapter right now to capture video from the RGB. It'd be a little more of a hassle for me. I was doing things lazily, and I was only getting black and white out of there, so that's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. Serial port here, and then these are usually, this would usually be covered blanks, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slots for expansion. Alright, so let's open this guy up. I think it's just a couple screws mostly on the sides, and take a look inside. Alright, here we go with the top of the case off. Proprietary power supply. The whole thing comes off with the front of it. Here's our floppy drive. You put your CD drive down there. If you wanted to put another floppy drive, you'd connect it here. I'll have to take these cards out and show those in a minute. I'm going to have to take all this off to get access. I think what I need to do, the chips I need to mess with are under this power supply. I believe these are Zorro slots for Zorro cards like these, and then I think these are just standard ISA, 8-bit and 16-bit, and I think, because I know you could get like PC emulator cards, and then I think you could use these. I don't know if any like Amiga cards just used ISA. I think they generally just used Zorro. I think there's like Zorro 1 and 2 slots. I probably should have looked and researched a little bit on what exactly these were, but yeah, there's really not a whole lot to this. This is basically an Amiga 500 with a little bit different motherboard with expansion slots on it. That's basically what it is. It has the same CPU, it has the same OCS or original chipset for the video and everything, so that's really why I wanted a 2000, just to have that really good compatibility with all those games that were meant for the Amiga 500, while still having an easier time expanding and adding things like hard drives and whatnot. Alright, so verifying, yeah, these right here are Zorro 2 slots, and these are indeed ISA slots right here. And there are some bridge boards that you can use that you would put here, and I think they're kind of like PC emulator cards. But so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Zorro 2 slots. There's also this little slot right here. I don't know what that is. That might be the CPU MMU slot, maybe for accelerators or memory management units to add, but I really don't know what that is and what can be put in it. So, quick look at the expansion cards I pulled out of it. This is just a dual serial board. I didn't install that thing, it just came with it, and it adds 2 more serial ports. Right there. And the other one's more interesting. This is my hard drive controller, and it also adds memory. Now right now there's only 2 megabytes of memory. While this thing's out, I should look through my memory and see if I have any to expand it. I think that would be seen as fast memory, and it should, looking at the little chart there, I believe it can add up to 8 megabytes of memory. So this is a A4000 HC plus 8 Series 2 from Great Valley. I think these were really meant to go in an Amiga 4. Actually, I think I have one of these exact cards in my Amiga 4000. But yeah, this seems to work just well in Amiga 2000 as well. Right now the hard drive attached is a 50 megabyte SCSI drive. This is something I am going to update in the future, although I haven't decided what I'm going to do. Whether I'm just going to add a bigger full SCSI drive, or if I'm going to try to procure one of those SCSI to SD adapters, which might be the route to go. I've also considered just getting rid of this and putting in an IDE controller to attach an IDE drive or a compact flash drive, but that's going to be a bit slower than the SCSI, so I don't know. I'm still considering what to do about that. Alright, so here we go with mostly everything removed. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't disconnect this power connection here with the PSU, and that's because I'm having a little bit of a hard time removing it, and I've had a real bad experience. I'll probably just do a video on my Amiga 4000, not actually the computer, but the horrible experience I've been through with it. So I'm really paranoid about damaging this board, and I'm just having a real hard time disconnecting this power connection here, so I'm just gonna leave it alone. It's barely in the way anyways, so yeah. So here we have our CPU right here. It's a Motorola 6800. Here is where the barrel battery was. As you can see, it looks like it leaked a little bit at one time. The previous owner removed it, and he's pretty knowledgeable about these things, so I believe he probably did something to it to deactivate the acid. So I think we're good. I've had this machine for quite a while now. I've never had a problem with it, so but I'm glad he removed it. I know you can replace these like you can with a regular PC with a coin battery holder. I believe right here is our ROM chip that we can install this guy in. Here's the onboard chip memory, I believe, the chip RAM. Fat Lady, we have Gary, these are labeled, Paula, and Denise, I believe. Denise, I believe, is the video controller, the video chip. Another expansion slot here, and I believe this is for some kind of video card sort of expansion. And there's even a little slot right here on the back. Now, I did some extra checking, and I do believe this slot here is for accelerator cards. Now, I said earlier I wanted to put an accelerator in this machine, but I want to do something very modest. I know there's the Vampire out there. That's kind of powerful. If I could find something cheap, right? I just want something that I could use for a boost for some particular games. But really, it doesn't need to be all that powerful. I'm not looking to turn this into like a power PC rig or anything like that. I have heard you can replace these with a 6810, I believe, but the power boost with that CPU is very minor, like 2 to 5 or 10%, 10% at best, and it does create some incompatibility. So I'm probably not going to go that route, but if I could find a very sort of a very kind of moderate accelerator that maybe adds some more RAM and, you know, just to make it a little bit more power for certain situations where it's needed, I would go for that. Now the problem I've run into is our floppy drive selector. Unfortunately, I believe these instructions are for an Amiga 500, and the setup here looks completely different. We have this chip here, although I don't think that's a chip because I think I checked the size and this one's too big. So by process of elimination, it is one of these two chips here, but the problem is I don't know which chip it is. So, okay, so I do have the ROM switcher installed, and it seems to be working fine. And I tried switching it the other way, and it's the other kickstart. Asked for Workbench 1.3. It's the older one, so at least that upgrade seems to be working just fine. So unfortunately I could not get the floppy drive selector setup to work. I believe after messing around with things, I believe it was the chip on the right, which is the correct chip. It's the one I got better results with, but I couldn't get it to work right. It could be any combination of things. I could get it where it would boot from a floppy in the actual floppy drive, and then when I'd switch the switch, it would stop, and then it would boot from the hard drive. So obviously something was going on there. But I couldn't get it to boot from the external drive. Like I said, I could get it where it would boot to the hard drive and then it would see the floppy emulator on the external drive, but I couldn't get it to boot from that. I think I was really close. I messed with it for like 1 or 2 hours and I just couldn't figure it out. It could have been a jumper was off somewhere. That little external doggle thing right there that I'm using, it has so many jumpers and it's real hard to read them. It's like version or revision 2.1. I don't even know if they make those anymore. Maybe something was off. I tried moving jumpers around for a while. I couldn't get it to work. And yeah, 2.1. I just kind of gave up. Maybe there's a better solution now. I bought all this stuff years ago, but I don't know. I just kind of gave up, at least for now. And so here's me discovering that composite jack only outputted mono. So for looking at some gameplay, we're just going to do the tried and true old point the camera at the monitor. Unfortunately, it's a CRT, so you're going to see some distortions, unfortunately. So I thought this would be interesting. Here's some direct capture I took, of course, in monochrome of that monochrome composite, but this is my machine actually booting up from the hard drive. Now, I suspect this machine used to be in a Kroger's grocery store because it boots up to some kind of serverish thing, and it looks like it cycles through like advertisements, and it's really garbled. The color, it's even on the monitor and the RGB on it, it's kind of black and white, but you can kind of make out some things like Kroger's, like the label, Kroger's of the sign, and looks like a drink and things like right here. So I think this was in a Kroger store, and I guess it was on maybe monitors in the store, and it would cycle through advertisements. So yeah, I guess that's what this thing was in a former life. I believe this Amiga 2000s was sitting in a Kroger somewhere, cycling through these ads. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So let's go on to the games. Alright, so if you're still with us, thanks for sitting through that. I'm sorry for the terrible quality there, but I wanted to give you some representation of the Amiga 2000 in action. And like I said, I didn't have an adapter at the moment on hand to do the capture the RGB directly. And my originally plan was to use that composite out, but it was in mono, so I just figured I'd use the tried and true method of pointing at the screen, but sometimes that works better than other times. So, the Amiga 2000. I really like this machine. I know the go-to Amiga, especially for people just getting into Amiga, is the Amiga 500, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a ton of them out there. They're generally sort of affordable as far as Amigas go. They take up less space. It's nice having the keyboard just kind of built in, but if you really want to go serious with Amiga, I really would recommend the Amiga 2000. It has a little bit bigger foot space on the desktop, but you have pretty much the same motherboard as the Amiga 500, more or less, same chipset anyways with the OCS, and you have a lot more opportunity for expansion. Now, there are downsides. These are a lot more expensive, generally harder to find. It's not exactly like the Amiga 500. As we saw with my attempt to add that floppy drive switcher, the instructions I got, I believe, were for an Amiga 500 because that's kind of the default system. So, you know, even though technically a lot of add-ons and stuff that work with an Amiga 500 should work with an Amiga 2000, they may not, or there may be minor differences. A keyboard might be an issue. Finding keyboards with these, the keyboards alone are sometimes kind of expensive and hard to get a hold of, where something like Amiga 500, they're built in. But if you can get your hands on one, I would definitely recommend it, just for the extra expandability, and you still have all that compatibility going on. So as far as my video today, I guess I succeeded with 50% of the upgrades I wanted to do. I did put in the ROM switcher, which is the one I really wanted to do anyways. That might come in handy later. So now I have 1.3 and 3.1 that I can switch between. And I was able to mount the switch on the back. So here's behind the Amiga, a little bit of a tight space, but if you can see it, I did mount the switch to switch between kickstarts. So that's a nice little switch there. And as you can see, I'm still going with the whole power and floppy ribbon out the back to the emulator drive, because I just cannot stomach installing one of those in there. It's just, oh, it looks so ugly. Yeah, it's a shame I couldn't get the floppy drive switcher going, but it's not a big deal. I'm going to be mostly using that emulator pretty much all the time anyways, and hopefully when I get the different hard drive solution in here, and I'll just be using WHD load plus that. I'll probably really never use this anyways unless I'm, you know, testing a real floppy or something like that. But hopefully I'll get that all sorted out later. I'm kind of hoping maybe someone in the comments might know what's going on or have a suggestion. Or I got that thing a couple years ago, so maybe there's even a better revision or something out now. So yeah, there's definitely going to be more videos on this thing. I do have plans for this to upgrade it more, the hard drive, maybe even add some sort of exotic things for an Amiga, like maybe USB, something like that. I want to add an accelerator, but I don't want to go crazy with it. I don't want to turn it into anything nuts, just something with a little bit of a modest speed boost that I can disable and enable as I need it. Things like that. I don't even know, more memory of course, but I don't even know if I'm going to go so far as to maybe add you know, they have little modifications that aren't too hard to install that give you VGA. But I mean, really, what's the point when I have an Amiga monitor here? I mean, it gives me more versatility, but I'm not going to use an LCD with this thing or anything like that. I really like to keep it kind of original as far as that goes. So that would probably be a waste of money for me. But yeah, so that's the Amiga 2000. At least this is my first video on this Amiga 2000. So any comments, please leave them in the comment section. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe and ring that bell and all that jazz. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.